please, Dan, come up and tell us about our guests and visiting Rotarians.
Good afternoon. We have a couple guests today. Yes, we have David Wagner here. Wagner, and he is the guest of Wayne. President Wayne.
I'm going to say a couple words.
Okay.
Yes, it is
I'm
David.
I'm not just eating all the time when I come.
All right, David Wanger is,
I didn't know I was going to be a guest again.
he's our executive director of the Habitat for Humanity Central Valley and a prospective member.
Thank you.
We also have Terry Wyatt Vargo. She's a guest of Sam Spiker.
I want to introduce fellow Rotarian, a very dedicated person from Wingfield Ministries, Terry. Honored to have her here with us.
And we also have Isaiah Bradshaw, and he's a guest of Keenan's today.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to introduce Isaiah Bradshaw, and it is Isaiah, not Isaiah. I have a speech impediment with cutting off words in one eye. Isaiah Bradshaw. Isaiah is a insurance broker with Goosehead Insurance down in the Fishersville area. And just a little bit about Isaiah was on the 2004 JMU National Championship team. He was a coach on the 2008 CAA Championship team. And much to my pleasure, he was a coach on the 2009 JMU team that beat Virginia Tech.
We also have Whit Menifee here from Bridgewater. He is our area governor. And he's soon to be. Welcome, Whit. And we also have Beau Dickenson. He is our speaker, and we'll talk about Beau a little bit later. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Dan. Well done. And again, it's great to see a full room. I say that every time, and I mean it. We appreciate people that show up, and there's some online, but it's good to see you all here with us today. And so, as always, I want to give an opportunity, if there's any family of Rotary announcements, things you want to tell us about what's going on with your family or people that are Rotarians. Okay. So we are thankful again that the regular announcement about putting your volunteer hours and signups, that list keeps growing. You all are doing a great job with service. And we, again, still have the RAM Clinic sign up, and that link was sent out and will continue to be sent out, and that's coming up, an opportunity to primarily park cars. I keep looking at Noah, he's my everything service. Primarily park cars.
Yeah.
But it's a great need. We do it all through, people show up late and early, and it's a phenomenal service project. So we will update you more on upcoming Rotary service projects. There's a lot of fun and rewarding things coming up. So that's what I have for today. I'll keep it short and ask Rodney to come up and tell us about today's speaker.
So I walked out of my office without Beau's bio, so I have it on my phone, but Beau may have to hold it for me. That to work out, so I'm gonna do that. But I'm excited to have Beau here today. One of my friends was the Teacher of the Year this year in Rockingham County, and I didn't get to go to the awards ceremony, but I had a number of friends that were there. Beau did this presentation at the awards ceremony, and I had a number of people call and text and email me after that, said, do you know Beau? You need to get Beau to come do this presentation. So we're excited to have him here today. A little bit about Beau. Beau is a national board certified teacher who currently serves as the K-12 social studies supervisor for Rockingham County Public Schools. He's the immediate past president of the state professional organization, the Virginia Social Studies Leaders Consortium, which is hard to say. He recently has had the honor of serving on the Governor's Commission on African Americans History Education, which made significant recommendations and technical edits designed to enrich the state standards related to Black history. We may or may not hear any about that, but some of you may have read about some of that in the news. This spring, he co-authored an article with Dr. Emma Thacker at JMU about a student project dealing with Barbara Johns and the 1951 student strike at R.R. Moden High School. That was featured on the cover of this month's Social Studies and the Young Learner. He's also the former chair of the Board of Trustees for Rocktown History and has worked to develop a local history curriculum for teachers and students for our community. So welcome back. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's indeed an honor to be with you and to speak about educators and the essential role that education plays in our community. I am the social studies supervisor. You may have noticed that the social studies curriculum has been in the news lately. I don't know if you pay attention. If you haven't noticed, please don't Google it. It's okay to laugh about that. We live in a political universe, and that's what our teachers confront. And I want to say a few words about how they do that, because that is a challenge. I started off as a social studies teacher at Spotswood High School. I was a student at Broadway High School in the late 90s. And I was always drawn to politics. I was always drawn to our history. But as we all know, this has become a very politicized world. And our teachers, I want to applaud them because they confront that with professionalism and with skill. And I want to call attention to what they do in particular. Our social studies teachers, K-12, because we have social studies in the elementary school, we have it, of course, in the middle school and high school, are those folks that specialize the way that I did. But they work tirelessly, and they do that to ensure that students have informed opinions, not particular opinions. A one-sided debate is not a debate that's fun to sit in and watch in a classroom. You want students coming at it from left, right, and center, and that's what our teachers try to nurture in our kids. They really just want them to get excited about social studies and have their own opinions be formed. They're patriotic Americans. They lead their kids every morning in the Pledge of Allegiance, and they're citizens who embrace democracy and justice. They bravely navigate that political landscape that I was talking about, and they do that with objectivity and the utmost sense of professionalism. They embrace American triumphs with pride, as we all do. But they also, and here's the hard part of their job that I'm going to touch on a little bit today, they touch on and they confront some of the injustices of our past with honesty, candor, and with truth. And you've probably heard the phrase hard history before. Raise your hand if you've heard hard histories. Anyone? It's very much become a new term. If you're not familiar with it, that's okay. It's very intuitive. They do this with skill, and they do this with nuance and respect. And hard history is rather aptly named, given that it deals with some of the more uncomfortable chapters of our past. You know, unsettling realities like the traumas that were confronted by Vietnam veterans like my dad and many of his fellow soldiers. Some of those veterans may be in this room. For our local community, some of the more uncomfortable stories. We have a class at East Rockingham High School that's taught by Miss Kim Dean, and she does it really well, but it talks about the unsettling realities and the exploitation of the removal of all those Blue Ridge Mountain residents that it took to give us the treasure that is Shenandoah National Park. But that's a hard history. I don't know if you know that story. Those folks paid a price for the rest of us. So how do we teach students about what happened to those people and still cherish this place that's in our backyard, that's one of the most wonderful places across this entire land, the Blue Ridge Mountains? How do you do that? How do you make that a proud story without diminishing the fact that those folks paid a very serious price? And of course, with our national history, how do you tell a student the history of enslavement and the legacy of Jim Crow without immediately making a classroom an uncomfortable place? And there's ways to teach about the truth and to do it without nuance and without respect and perhaps diminishing what is the truth. So our teachers have to confront that.
Great.
Yes, thank you.
Oh.
I want to show a photograph that I think captures this. No one's ever looked at the picture of Elizabeth Eckford in the Little Rock Nine and felt comfortable, black or white. We're all uncomfortable looking at this reality of the past. That indeed is a hard history. It takes, and here's where I'm going to talk about my colleagues, it takes skill to even show this image in a classroom and not have unintended consequences. It takes considerable professional skill to help white students confront the history of white supremacy that is on vivid display in this image, but without making those students feel as if their own whiteness connects them to this ugly chapter of our past. It's been a topic in the news, as I think everyone knows. How do we teach hard history? It takes a lot of skill to confront the vulnerability and the victimization of this particular Black student without also further victimizing and making the Black students of today feel uncomfortable in that classroom. I'll never forget one day a student came in when I was teaching at Spotswood High School. I was teaching about the Civil Rights Movement, and they're very inspiring stories of the Civil Rights era for Black and white Americans. And I had an African-American student in the front row. He came to me afterwards and said, I'm not comfortable learning about this in class. And I really had to take a pause and reflect on what I was doing as an educator, because I thought I was telling a really inspiring story, and I had made that young man feel very uncomfortable. So we always think about that. I thought about it from a white lens because, as you can see, I'm a white person. But I really didn't understand the perspective of the Black student that was sitting in front of me. I knew how to talk to it from my perspective. I had to learn about his perspective. And I learned about that through conversation and candor. But here's the part where I really want to talk about social studies teachers. They do all those things that I just mentioned, but here's what they do that I think is something that is considerable and important and essential, particularly now in the moment that we find ourselves. It takes monumental skill and experience to confront this image honestly and enable students of both races, as well as students of other backgrounds and places and ethnicities, to see through it and see the humanity, agency, and resilience of Elizabeth Eckford as a true American hero. There she is many years later, now in bronze, not far from the steps of the school that she helped integrate in 1957. No small feat, of course. That she is an American hero to us all who overcame in spite of profound injustices, and most certainly a hero to students with similar lived experiences, but a masterful educator brings her to life and her story to life for everyone as someone who courageously had to confront some of the most difficult chapters of our past and move past and create a better democracy for all of us, one free of Jim Crow segregation. No small task, right? But telling that story to students in 2023 and making Elizabeth Eckford, this young woman at the time now, this elderly woman of Little Rock, Arkansas, an American hero, is what social studies teachers do. We teach hard history. So please just take a moment, let's join. It's been difficult the past couple of years communicating this and being very clear to what we do and why we do it. We pause and just recognize the social studies teachers of our community for doing that with skill. They are good people. I thank you for that because they're the people I serve and they're the people I represent. And that message is very, very important to me personally. It's in that same spirit that I'd like to share a chapter of our own local history. And it's one that's very proud, but perhaps a little bit hard. There's a hard chapter here. But within that, much like this story, it has agency and resilience that we can all celebrate. So stay with me. As many of you know, the annual Educator of the Year award is named in honor of Miss Lucy Francis Sims. An incredible story, an incredible biography, an incredible woman. She was born in 1856 and was enslaved at the Hilltop Plantation. There she is. The Hilltop Plantation's on the northeastern edge of Harrisonburg, and that's the very same hillside that currently overlooks the historic school, later named in her honor nearly a century later. How many people knew that the Sims School was on plantation grounds? It's an incredible story. She is laid to rest not a block away from the property where she was enslaved. The Sims School is less than a block from her home that still stands proudly on East Johnson Street. It's a school that's at the center of the Northeast neighborhood that was first established by formerly enslaved people seeking newfound freedom in the wake of the Civil War that was so tragic for this area in particular. And it's a school just east, as I mentioned, of her gravesite in Newtown Cemetery, where she was laid to rest after her 57th year in the classroom, missing one half day. I've missed 5 days this year already. I mean, 1 year and nearly 1 day, one half day, not a full day, in 6 decades of service is a profound accomplishment. That photograph's my favorite of Miss Sims because I think it captures her career, her demeanor, her posture, the pride that you see in her face and her expression. But when you know the full story, that she taught that grandmother, she taught that grandmother's daughter who's seated to her right, and she taught that grandmother's granddaughter that is on the far side of the photograph. That's a very powerful photograph. Her life, her school, the Newtown community that surrounds it all represents a profound testament to freedom and how circumstances, of course, can be changed when the agency of freed people born in bonds, as she was, worked to transform a place of enslavement and degradation to one of community, refuge, most importantly, from my perspective, the uplifting power of education. What a testament to the classroom. What a testament to teachers. She taught over 1,800 students in the span of 3 generations. Miss Sims crossed to that other shore on the night of July 10th, 1934, just a few years after that photograph was taken. She was discovered the next morning on the front porch of her East Johnson Street home. She likely suffered a stroke, as we know, and in the middle of the night went outside distressed in a call for help as her life tragically slipped away. The story of her funeral, as reported in the Daily News Record, was one of the most memorable and widely attended in Harrisonburg's history. On a stark white headstone adorned with lilies, if you've never seen it, go. It's easy to find in Newtown Cemetery. It is remarkable headstone, and it certainly stands out. Her engraved epitaph, which was written by her brother U.G. Wilson, says the following. It's very profound, 3 sentences. First, she was loved and honored for a life of unselfish service to the community and to her race. She taught in the public schools of the city for 57 consecutive years, not losing a day. And then finally, simply but profoundly, she rests from her labors. As we all know, her story does not end there on that humid July day of 1934. Her life is a remarkable story of a woman of color and a fellow educator who overcame long odds to become one of the most cherished leaders in the community and the history of this area. In fact, she is recognized across the Commonwealth as she is now featured on the new, recently unveiled Emancipation and Freedom Monument on Browns Island in Richmond. There are 10 individuals that are featured there by name, 5 before the Civil War and 5 after. Miss Sims was chosen as a representative of that journey after enslavement into freedom past Reconstruction. one of 5 Virginians recognized, the only woman, in fact, on that monument. Now, while she's one of the notable firsts, everybody loves the first stories, right? Who was the first who did this? Who was Rosa Parks is a great story. She was in many ways not the first in that case, but it's the first in the textbooks, right? It's always the first. I think Miss Sims would love that we would be celebrating her legacy, but she would hate it if she was the only story. In fact, I think she would scold us for that. She was a humble woman. So in that spirit, I would like to tell a story from her legacy, and not the first. So in speaking about the dangers of a single story, I don't know if you've ever heard that or heard the TED Talk of Chimamanda Adichie. She warns famously, stories matter. Many stories matter, she said. Miss Adichie says, stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, certain stories told certain ways. But stories can also repair that broken dignity. Miss Sims would not forgive us if we allowed her to become the single story of Newtown and Harrisonburg and the larger community of teachers. So while this is a story about Black history, this is also a story just about educators. This is another educator in that long history. So bear with me, I'm going to tell you the story. Does anybody recognize the photograph? You might recognize the name. This is towards the end of her career. This is right before the Sims School integrated. And the Sims School was closed at Harrisonburg and Rockingham County integrated in 1964-65. This is the last school year. Her name was Mrs. Mary Awkard, and then she later married Jim Fairfax, and she became Mary Fairfax. So Mrs. Mary Fairfax. A few years after Miss Sims passed, a young teacher by the name of Mrs. Mary Awkard came to teach in Harrisonburg. She actually had been a student of Miss Sims at the former Effinger Street School that once stood near the intersection with Mason Street. Some of you may remember the building. No longer there, it's near where Rose's department store is today. Miss Awkard was recruited by Superintendent William H. Keister, which of course, Keister Elementary, right? He was superintendent at the time. He recruited her to teach in a new one-room school for Blacks in nearby Newmarket, Virginia. Of course, this is before the days of integration. After 2 years as an unlicensed teacher, Mrs. Awkard decided to pursue her professional teaching certificate at Virginia State College, where she graduated with honors. When she was student teaching, her classmates asked her, how did she manage to command such control over the classroom? She responded with characteristic candor, because Mrs. Fairfax could be blunt. Well, I taught in a one-room school when I was 18 years old. That's how. I hope her personality comes through in this presentation. She was a wonderful teacher, but she had command of a classroom. The students said we didn't dare get in trouble with Miss Fairfax. We'd get away with stuff with other folks. There were other teachers in the building that were a little bit lax. Not Miss Fairfax. She was a profound leader. In 1942, Mrs. Awkard, now still Miss Awkard, yet to be married. Miss Awkard, that was probably at a time when women teachers, female teachers, were not permitted to get married. She also saw that transition in her lifetime. So we're not dealing with just color, we're dealing with gender and a patriarchal society. In 1942, she was hired as the second grade teacher at the newly opened Lucy F. Sims School, namesake of her former first grade teacher. Similar to Miss Sims, Miss Awkard was a lifelong learner. She continued professional development during the summers. She earned her bachelor's degree from Virginia State in the 40s. She became one of the only teachers in Harrisonburg, Black or white, to hold a master's degree in early childhood education, a rarity at that time. Not only was this an advanced degree, but Mrs. Awkard also had the distinction of earning it from the prestigious Columbia University in New York City. Ms. Awkard served as the second grade teacher at Sims for the next 24 years when the school was closed in 1966 as a result of desegregation. Over the course of those 2.5 decades, she was a beloved teacher who modeled agency, dedication, patience, strictness, but also love. She was definitely one that was tough love, probably very tough, but more love than tough. Corliss Brown, who I've met, she imparted these words. In fact, she said, when you arrived in Miss Awkard's class, you got your own desk and you knew that you were moving up. You knew that you were going to learn something. Donna Brock, who also still lives in the community, says, she was always kind, exceedingly kind. Very seldom did she have to get strict with us. She could toe the line. When desegregation led to the closure of the Sims School in 1966, Ms. Awkard faced the challenge of being hired to teach in the formerly all-white schools of Harrisonburg City. She was actually one of the few, one of only 2 Black educators who were offered a position. And she was forced to say goodbye to Sims, as well as see so many of her former colleagues forced unjustly to search for other employment. While the Brown decision obviously is celebrated as a correction to historic injustices, that's how the textbook teaches. The Brown decision was a major turning point in our history. But sometimes there's another side of the Brown decision that's not always told. And that is the immediate consequences, perhaps unintended, but consequences nonetheless, that were experienced by that first generation to confront racial integration. Miss Awkard's career moved to Waterman Elementary, but in many ways her heart remained at Sims and the community that she had served so long there. Integration was not often a very pleasant experience for Black students or Black teachers, and many searched for the warmth and the understanding and obviously the sense of community that had been nurtured at Sims for many years. This was all very new, and suddenly it was gone. That summer, Miss Awkard found refuge in the love that she found with a man named Jim Fairfax. They soon married, and that fall she began an entirely new phase of her career in teaching white students, as well as Black students, and working with white colleagues. And you can imagine, if we think about that and think about that time, there were probably some who were welcoming, relatively smooth here. It was not without incident, but it was different from other parts of the South. She commented on many of the colleagues that went out of their way to welcome her to Waterman Elementary. So there were welcoming, kind-natured folks. There were some folks who were indifferent, and there were some folks who held on to that resistance that continued to fester. For many years, her colleagues were completely unaware that Miss Fairfax had a master's degree, let alone one from an Ivy League university. When the topic came up one day at the soda machine in the teacher's lounge, the rumor was that Superintendent Keister was searching for a teacher representative, but the requirement was that they had to have a master's degree, and many of the teachers were lamenting that they would like to participate but did not have the required credentials. Looking back on that moment, Ms. Fairfax says, matter-of-factly, I just said, I have it. In thinking about that particular moment, that should not have been noteworthy just beyond collegial conversation, she recalled, you could have heard 2 pins drop in the room. All across America, integration forced communities to reckon with the past. Some folks in this room may have lived through that, as my parents did. Some communities did this more than others, but nowhere was this work easy or without incident. However, I think the story, and particularly the story of Miss Fairfax, demonstrates that love and understanding can still win the day if we give it just the slightest of chances. It's important to acknowledge that Mrs. Fairfax was forced to give it that chance in moving to Waterman, while her colleagues there had the freedom to make that choice or not. I believe it was Miss Mary Fairfax's abiding love, talent, dedication, and kind willingness that likely changed many hearts and minds at Waterman Elementary and throughout the Harrisonburg-Rockingham community for a generation. Much like her first 24 years at Sims, she became a beloved educator and a respected colleague at Waterman, where she spent the last 10 years, a decade of her teaching career. While Miss Fairfax has a special place in this community in particular, her legacy certainly impacts us all. And that impacts us with the sacred charge of empowering young learners to always reach higher. I see this from two lenses. I see this as the lens of a history teacher looking at, of course, circumstances that were historic. This is Black history, this is American history. Black history is American history. This is a story we all share and we are intertwined within. I also see the history of educators and teachers and the role that they play in a community, and what a profound story she has. She always tried to teach students to reach higher. You can find that spirit of Miss Sims in the unselfish service. Remember that phrase, unselfish service? It's in the epitaph that is tapped into the stone of her gravesite in Newtown Cemetery. Unselfish service, I think, captures what teachers do every day. It's certainly service, and it's certainly giving of yourself, and it is mostly undeniably unselfish. The power of teachers' instruction to scaffold understanding and to build student confidence provides that empowering sense of, remember Corliss Brown saying in second grade, I was moving up, that was remembered by the students of Miss Fairfax. I'd like to close with a profound statement that I think captures this sense and this spirit of dedication that all teachers have, no matter the walk of life, no matter the neighborhood, no matter our history. All teachers, as Miss Fairfax was known to say to her students, and how she gave so unselfishly of herself. Corliss Brown remembers, and many of her former students said, I remember her saying this, and I find no better words to close with. Pay attention, because I'm going to give you everything I've got to give. Thank you.
Questions from the audience?
I'll give you a moment to think about that. I will say I need to recognize that many of my remarks are informed by the Mary Fairfax exhibit, which is new. If you go to the Sims Center, there is a beautiful exhibit that talks about the history of Miss Sims and the community that was done by James Madison University and this incredible project. A second part of that project was to tell the story of Miss Fairfax. And where is it? It's in the conference room, which was the second grade classroom that she taught in for 24 years. So if you're ever at the Sims Center, go into the conference room and you'll find the story of Miss Fairfax. Any questions?
Jim Fairfax, was he a minister?
I believe he was. I'm not 100% on that, but I believe so.
I knew him.
You knew him, okay. Any other questions?
Thanks, Beau. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing and the students are doing to learn about local history that's not necessarily captured in textbooks, but there's a lot of articles, oral histories, things like that that really
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. That's definitely a passion of mine. I'm no longer on the board at Rocktown History because I served my 2 terms 6 years ago off the board. I'm just very recently the chairman, but during the work there, of course, the Rocktown History, if you've not been to Dayton, it's a wonderful museum and it tells the stories of this community. This is a great example of what I mean about local history. We talk about the Brown decision, right? That's in boldface words in the textbook. Textbook doesn't say, well, how did the Brown decision unfold in your community? That's where it becomes relevant for students. You know, they talk about eminent domain, right, in the government textbook. Well, what is eminent domain? Well, you can learn about it by talking about Shenandoah National Park and the reality of how eminent domain was used there. And that's a hard history, but it's, you know, not telling the story and sweeping it under the rug, that further marginalizes the people involved in that story. So to focus in on your question, our 5th grade is a thematic curriculum that we developed where we look at these national events and these larger concepts. and we unpack them with local stories. So with Reconstruction, we tell the story of Miss Sims. To tell the story of the Civil War, we talk about the burning. That probably was your fault, Mr. Haywood. You brought out all those documents to Spotswood High School, and I thought, boy, there's a story that we haven't told. When he opened those documents and they were singed on the edges, and you made us bend down and smell the smoke, it just came alive for me. And that's a story that you will not find in a textbook anywhere. But I would like to recognize our clerk of court, because he is an unofficial social studies teacher of Rockingham County Schools. We very much believe in the power of documents, and he brings all these incredibly powerful documents that students can see. They have the seals of English kings on them. It's an incredibly powerful thing. So those stories, I think, bring to light that this national history unfolded in your backyard. The Thomas Harrison House is a great story. Not only in archaeology, we thought that Thomas Harrison lived there. It turns out through Carol Nash's work in archaeology that A. Harrison lived there, but the building was built after he died. So, interesting lesson in archaeology. Very, very fascinating. So yes, I think local history is very important.
Round of applause for Beau. This microphone is kicking on and off, but I just want to take a second. I guess that's one of the privileges of taking my turn as club president, is I can occasionally make some commentary. But I'm just struck again how important the work that we're doing as a club, because we're made up of Republicans and Democrats and moderates and people of all faiths and some people of no faith. But for us to be able to hear directly from people that are involved in some of these local organizations and help share what's really going on, versus how many times do we tell a story that somebody told us about what is happening over there in that organization. And so this is a real important work, I think, of the Rotary Club, and also for us to be leaders in making all people feel welcome and safe to our community. And so thank you for telling part of that story. And I am also appreciative, Whit, that you joined us today. Always appreciate it. Isaiah, thank you for coming. David and Terry, thank you for all of our visitors today. And I don't think I missed any. We are adjourned.
Thank you.